Coming up, we discuss Braille education in the United States.
This is Double Tap, celebrating Braille at 200. Now, here's your hosts, Stephen Scott and Sean Priest.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Double Tap. I am Stephen Scott, and today on the show, we are continuing our celebration of Braille at 200. And we're going to really dive into this. I mean, yesterday we talked a lot about the history of Louis Braille and the code, and we looked at some of the latest and greatest technology that's out there. But today I want to focus in on education, because one plank of Braille is education, right? If children don't learn Braille at school, then, well, what chance has it got to survive? And who's learning at school? Is it just blind children? Or what about low vision children? Are they encouraged to use audio rather than Braille? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's something we're going to discuss today with our special guest, Kate Crohan, who is a qualified teacher of visually impaired children. Now, coming up this week, we're also going to be joined by Elizabeth McCann. She is going to be talking to us about her experience of teaching Braille around the world. She teaches currently in Scotland, but she's worked in Canada and she's travelled to Jakarta recently, and she's going to join us to talk about that. We're also going to be talking about the tech as well and getting a bit of a state of the nation in terms of technology with Stuart Lawler from Sight and Sound Technology in the UK, and also he'll be joined by Gregory Hargraves from Page Braille. Now, you might remember we talked about Page Braille in 2024. Well, Greg is back because he has many interesting thoughts, and he's done a lot of research into the statistics around Braille, the link between Braille and literacy, and the Braille numbers of people who actually use Braille, and also that link between Braille and employment. These are serious questions that need to be asked, because the big question ultimately is the data correct? Is it up to date? Is it giving us an up-to-date picture of where we're at with Braille in 2025 as we celebrate 200 years of the code? Well, we're going to get into all of that this week. But first, let's begin our conversation on education.
My name is Kate Crohan, and I'm a teacher of the visually impaired. I am right outside of Boston, Arlington, Massachusetts. I currently teach at the Perkins School for the Blind, and I teach in the secondary program. And so I have a range of students from 14, and some of our students stay until they're 22, depending on their program. So I feel very fortunate to be there and to have the range of students that I have. Prior to that, I'll start from the beginning. When I first started teaching, I was at the Carroll Center for the Blind, and I worked in their independent living program. And I absolutely loved that job as well. I was teaching students who were new to vision loss. At least most of them were. There were a few who were there because either they needed more skills and realized it as they got older. But for the most part, I taught people who were new to vision loss. And, Braille is often a difficult thing for people to take in because it's what people associate with vision loss. And if you're new to that, not obviously, and you're still in the process of adjusting, Braille is like one more thing to add to, like this really means that I am, losing vision and am classified as low vision or blind. Then from there, I was working part-time. So I wanted more hours. So I ended up joining the Educational Services Division of the Carroll Center. And I did that 2 days a week and worked in public school, which was an absolutely wonderful experience. I worked with a TVI. I was on a waiver at that point and worked with an incredibly wonderful teacher of the visually impaired there. So that gave me experience with a completely different population of students and all that was going on in public school and what we needed to do in order to adapt, put materials into Braille and find the time to fit Braille into the curriculum. And so I often taught after school on days when the students didn't have activities, just to give that extra time to students who really needed it. And then part of that was a summer program, which was at that time was called Carol Kids, and that I just loved. It was kids who came there, many of them were residential. So that was a great program. Um, and then eventually I left there and moved over to Perkins, where I've been since 2008. And in the process, with encouragement from the TBI that I worked with in public school, I got my degree in vision studies to become a teacher of the visually impaired.
There's so much I could pick up on, but I've got to say the one thing that immediately jumps out at me is when you talk about learning Braille almost equaling acceptance of losing vision or having no vision. I find that a really interesting perspective on that. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Many of the students who were older were convinced, well, there were several aspects of it. Some people were convinced they couldn't learn Braille because their sense of touch hadn't been developed to the degree that they felt was needed to learn Braille. And I remember I had a student who was in her 70s, and she did an absolutely wonderful job. And, people aren't going to be, I had one student who wanted to read the Bible, and I said, we're probably going to have to find other ways for you to do that because, when you're developing, when you're becoming a Braille reader, obviously you don't have, it takes a while to develop reading speed. So, and I said, but if you're reading Braille labels and if you can, in public buildings, if you can write your own Braille labels, you're hugely ahead of where you might have been without Braille. And I still believe that, even though I use my phone to often identify content, I still label things in Braille because it's quicker. And even if you're a new Braille reader, it gives you that extra practice that you'll always need in order to become better. So that was one part of it. People were afraid they couldn't read Braille. Another part that I alluded to, of course, at the beginning was that people associated Braille with blindness. And if you're not sure, if you haven't totally adjusted to losing your vision and ultimately becoming blind in many cases, that's a hard concept because it sort of, there it is, I am going to be blind and I will need Braille. So, and that's the thing that people have always associated with blindness, even long before they knew Braille. So I would always try to incorporate lots of aspects of my life into my teaching. And at the Carroll Center, it was easy because, well, it's easy no matter where I was, but there particularly, the people were adults, so they had lots of life experiences that we could share and talk about. And I always felt that that was a way of just letting people know that your life doesn't end with vision loss or blindness. That there's, I talked about my children and about, what I did when I wasn't at work, that kind of thing. Because I just wanted to make life, to help people to realize that their life would attain a new normal. And then there were the students who were diabetic, and that was more difficult because your sense of touch really does vary. Like there's some days when reading was more difficult, and often people would read for a while and then they would reach a threshold when they really couldn't read. So would often take a break and not read for a bit. And so I try to help people to become aware of when they reached that point. So they weren't trying to read Braille at that point and telling themselves they couldn't read. So, to become more aware of their how their fingers felt, and if they did have or were feeling some neuropathy, to just wait a bit. Sometimes we would put spaces between letters to make reading a little easier for Braille label. There's Dymo tape, there are Braille, freestanding Braille labels, and sometimes one of those was a little better than the other in terms of durability. So, all those factors came into play, but ultimately I wanted people to realize that they could read even though there may appear to have been roadblocks. So,
did you ever feel when you were teaching children Braille that you were ever facing that same issue of acceptance from the blind child? Was it the same for them as it was for a blind adult?
Yeah, it was a little different, I think, but I did feel that way. I had a student who, I've had students who needed surgery, and then their vision was worse for a bit, and then they eventually, either adjusted to their vision loss or regained some vision. But that was really tough to teach those students Braille. I always try to incorporate other ways of using Braille as I teach, in addition to labels, like making a Braille drawing, for instance. Even if you just write a little heart on a card that you want to send to someone, so that you can, incorporate ways of using Braille for a child that would be fun. So, or walking around and reading the room numbers or the buttons on an elevator, although an elevator sometimes can be pretty tricky because you're not always sure where the labels are going to be, and the door closes and you have to get to the floor you need. So,
well, I had a great experience on a cruise ship once where I actually, it was a brand new cruise ship, and they had actually labeled the elevator numbers upside down.
Oh no.
So 10 was 1 and 1 was 10. It was one of those kind of things. It was just hilarious.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was only because I kept hitting the wrong button and ending up on the wrong floor, and I realized they've got this wrong.
Oh no. Oh, that is crazy. Oh dear. But
they took the feedback well, though.
Yeah, I really feel like labeling is really important, and that it's important to label in a way so that the students can read it. Like if you have, you don't want to put a label on something so that the person looking at it may be able to read it really well. But if you have to point your finger up and bend your hand in a weird way to read it, it's not going to work, So I really feel that the position of labels is really important, but having the absolute wrong label, oh my word, it's good that you figured it out.
It's interesting to me because it feels like, and I'm sure you'll say, well, this has been going on for a long time, or at least you will have imagined it to have been. But for me, I feel that this conversation around labeling and using Braille in this way, in a much more everyday approach, rather than, as you say, sitting down and reading the Bible, which some people may absolutely wish to do, but
yes.
The amount of time it would take to learn to get to a speed that would make that viable,
yes,
would be not. It's perhaps a little bit insurmountable. Whereas instead, using Braille in a really positive, everyday way, that feels quite new to me in the whole conversation around Braille. That feels like it's only been being had out loud for about 5 years or so. Do you agree?
I don't know, because I've been thinking of it that way for so long that, but I know that people with whom I work, there's functional Braille, and there's for students who may not really be able to use it for many, for a variety of reasons, for academic purposes, but Braille is still really, really helpful. And not to mention, that learning a skill is certainly good for our brains, to learn a new skill. And if it's one that even if you use it in a more limited way, it still serves many purposes. So.
And I think that's important, right? And this is kind of why I enjoy having this conversation, and I'm really enjoying this conversation with you about this, because I feel that we maybe have to lose a little bit of the stigma in our community, in our blind world sometimes, that, if you're not reading, I don't know, 100 words a minute or whatever, whatever the good number is for reading Braille, it's not that you've failed. It's not that you're not capable. It's not that you're less than. That actually, it is about using this in a meaningful way that can actually improve your life in little ways, not necessarily big ways. And,
Yes.
labeling a jar or labeling a CD collection or labeling a
Yes.
whatever it might be can really make the difference in finding your way around doing things.
I
And that's
agree.
where Braille can be useful for a lot of people.
Yes. And it gives you it gives you a different level of independence. So, and it's that certainly is the goal, no matter what your capability is. So I know it is very different from when I learned Braille because, you know, I I still remember when I was little and learned Braille, and that was, I did have I have light perception, so there was no question I needed Braille. There was no low vision part of it ever. Um, and I loved Braille from the moment I started reading. And, so it was so different when I learned it because there was we didn't have Braille technology and we, I don't ever remember being exposed to Braille prior to being in school. I went to a school for the blind for K through 11, and then when I was a senior in high school, I went to the public school near where I lived, which was really a fantastic experience. So, but I just immediately loved Braille. But we everyone in my family read. We had my father read to us when we were little. And so for me, books were always magical. So when I could read on my own, I absolutely just loved it. And of course, now there's technology and audiobooks and many different ways to read. And that's a whole that's another part of the discussion because I think Braille really has to be pushed in order to develop a good reading speed. So, yeah, but there's so many different aspects of so many different.
Well, it does. It depends on. I think you're alluding to this yourself, but it does depend on the need of the individual, doesn't it? So if you're going into law or you're going into science or mathematics in a big way, and that's going to be a big part of your career, then you need Braille and you need the skill and you need the speed and all of that.
Yes.
But I think we'd both agree that if someone's like me in their 40s and decided to move into that career, perhaps Braille isn't the way to do it. Perhaps audio is the way I need to focus.
Yes, yes. And I read tons of audiobooks. I'm a Victor Stream and I would never want to be without it. I walk a lot and we have a bike trail where I live, so I can walk, like literally hug the edge of the bike trail so that I don't have to, I don't read when I'm, crossing streets and that kind of thing. But if I'm in a safe straightaway, where I can literally stay on the edge, I don't use headphones, obviously, but I read tons of audiobooks and that serves a huge purpose. And I agree with you. There are times when Braille isn't the way to go, but or not completely anyway. So
yeah, it's a tapestry, isn't it? And it's about having all these different tools. I often liken it to tools in the toolbox.
Yes.
I would argue that it's more important than that, but you get my idea.
I do.
You touched on low vision, and we were talking before we started, and I told you about because everyone knows my view on this, but I've been pushing this for a long time, and it feels like I should be pushing out an open door, but I don't know if I am in some cases, where I really do think, and this comes from a personal position, I didn't learn Braille at school. I wish I had.
Yes.
So for children who are low vision, for those children who are being told today, and we're still getting stories of people saying, my grandson, my child is being told, no, they can't get trained on Braille because they have enough usable vision. Doesn't it prove that there's a need to train it anyway? Because the reality is the brain will retain it, especially as a child.
Yes.
Children's brains can retain so much.
It's true.
Compared to, let's just say, my 42-year-old adult brain. So it would be so good for these children to learn. Why are people not doing this? Why is this not happening?
I think some of it is that there's just so much to teach, and if you're, if you have vision and can use, magnification, figuring out which one works best. And so often it's just, I think anyway, a limited number of hours in the day, and using what you can use efficiently. But I totally agree with you. I really feel that it's hugely important.
Now,
Yeah.
that leads me to my next question, because I've often wondered about this, and I'm wondering this now, and I'd love your view on this. And I think there's a lot of people like me out there who are, getting to grips with grade 1 and feel they're comfortable with grade 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then they hear grade 2
Mm-hmm.
and they think, okay, and they dip their toe. And like me, you dip your toe and it's like, this is a lot to take in. And I feel in my mind like I have to learn all of it before I can use it.
Yes.
So, I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. Is living with grade 1 okay? Is that something you think is acceptable, or do you think there is a genuine value in someone even at my age going forward and learning
I
grade 2?
love contracted Braille, so and I also feel that there are so many different approaches to teaching Braille now, that in terms of the introduction of the contractions, that it's going to make reading more efficient ultimately. So, um, and I feel that there's so many, especially for adults, when I taught adults, and I didn't even know. I learned as a child, so I just learned it. I never thought of how I learned,
Exactly,
how
yeah.
I memorized it. But when I taught adults, I really had to think about it. And I remember, well, with uncontracted Braille, just writing the alphabet, like A through J, and you space 3 times between the B and the C, and then writing K through T underneath that, and doing the same thing. And then when you wrote U through Z, the W fit into that space, so you could immediately notice the pattern of A, K, A through J uses the top 4 dots. K through T adds a dot 3, and I used to say, and U through Z add 6 to the mix. And so it made remembering the alphabet so much easier if that was your way of learning. You could also do it numerically, like A and B go together, 1 and 1, 2, and then C, D, and E, and then F, G, H, and you can go on and on. But I think that same thing applies to learning contractions. There are ways of introducing them that make memorizing them and much easier. So I think if you think of it in terms of this hurdle, like, oh, it's contracted Braille. How am I going to learn grade 2 Braille? It seems more difficult, but there are ways of introducing the quote unquote code so that it would be easier.
I want to ask you, because we've been having a debate on our show for a while now about the subject of QWERTY keyboard versus Perkins input keyboards. And I bring it up because I recently got my hands on a Mantis Q40 Braille display.
Yes.
I went out and bought one.
Yeah.
And I love it. I absolutely love it. And the reason I got it, and it's an interesting story, because I got it and I thought, and I have a Braille display. I have a Focus 40 Braille display. So I've got a good Braille display that I got through work years ago. And it was great. But I couldn't get to grips with it. I just could not get, I kept just walking away from it, because I thought, I feel like there's another level of learning that is required to be able to use this thing effectively. But with the Mantis, I don't feel that, because it is a QWERTY keyboard. I can touch type, so I can easily navigate that. And I've got the 40 cell Braille display, and I can read fairly quickly with grade 1. I say fairly, it's not very fast, but it's fast enough for me to keep an eye on what's going on the screen, on the display. Do you think we'll see a time where we'll move away from Perkins, or do you see Perkins as valuable as the code itself?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't have a Mantis, but I used a Mantis for a while, a few years ago, because I had a student who used it, or who I thought would use it well. And it was certainly the right decision for that student, because the student used Braille, was not a super good, didn't spell very, spelling was not easy for that student. So, and memorizing all of the contractions, but the student could read them. So the Mantis was a great thing for him, because we could use it with the laptop, with the phone, or as a standalone. And he typed pretty well. So it was perfect because you can write, on the QWERTY keyboard and have contracted Braille appear, which I think is a wonderful thing. And I know people who, I knew a guy many years ago who opted for, at that time, there was a note taker, the Braille Note Apex, which,
Yes.
yeah, and that you could buy one with a QWERTY keyboard. And my friend who had used Braille all of his life opted for that because he felt that he typed faster on a QWERTY than he could write using a Perkins Braille style keyboard, BT. So I don't know. I don't know. It's like the debate about the Braille writer, whether or not people really need a Braille writer. And I use mine every day. I use it for
well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is really important in this mix, and it kind of throws my argument out of the window a little bit, because I use the Perkins as well, almost not every day, but near enough.
Yes.
And I'll use it for quick notes. I'll take quick notes with it.
Yeah.
And I think there's no QWERTY equivalent of that. There's no Braille printer that's going to be able to, almost like a Braille typewriter with QWERTY keyboard.
Yes.
That doesn't exist that I know of.
No, I don't know of one. No, I use my Braille writer all the time, and I use it for labeling. There is a 6-dot labeler out, which is a wonderful machine, but it's expensive. The kids love it.
Yes. I bet.
But it's expensive, and
you can also connect a QWERTY keyboard to that as well.
Right. I have not done that. Yes.
Yeah, which is kind of cool, right? Because it kind of does give you that option to, at least for labels, type them out rather than using the Perkins input.
Yeah. But I love recipes in hard copy Braille, paper Braille, because first of all, I have a huge recipe collection that I acquired or started acquiring or putting together long before note takers were around. So, and I think it's a lot safer to have hard copy Braille, paper Braille in the kitchen than it is a note taker, where
Yes.
you can certainly do it, but you have to be much more careful about, I do have tons of recipes on my computer too. So, but there's some things that I love in paper Braille. I still write my check ledger in Braille, which is on one level pretty crazy on some levels, because I access my banking information on my laptop or especially on my phone. But there's something about, I just love being able to write down all my transactions and have them there, especially if I need to look back on something.
And if the internet goes off and you have to do something, then you've got it there. You're ahead of the game.
Yes.
And I think that's in the same way that someone would take. I mean, it is the equivalent of a pen and paper.
Yes,
for a lot of people.
It is. Yes.
And why would we not want access to that, as well as all the other tools? But people who still use their phone all the time still sit with a notepad and pen.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Of course, the thing here is, and this is the interesting bit for me, because it's all interesting, honestly, but I think that Braille only exists if we use it, right? And it's like anything else. But if we don't use it, it's gone. And the numbers, the statistics that I see time and time again coming out of America, in particular the NFB stats that I saw recently, which suggested that the numbers of people who are using Braille are very low.
Yes.
And I wonder how true that is. How true are these numbers, and how should organizations do more to try and figure this out? Because I feel the number's higher than perhaps it's made out to be. I don't doubt it's low, but what is it, 10% is suggested?
That's
that
what I've
10%
heard,
of blind
yes.
children use Braille? That seems very low to me. I mean, you're teaching Braille to children. You're not alone in this. You're not the only person. So, where are all these children? And do you think do you think there's truth to that stat?
I certainly hope it isn't. And, based on my own life, it certainly isn't. I mean, everybody I know, all the people who are blind or visually impaired that I know, use Braille, of course. And then the teaching environment that I'm in, I have, I teach technology and Braille although this year I have more Braille students than I've had in a while. But certainly the students who use technology use Braille all the time. And I know that's one of the arguments that people use, like, do note takers really take away from students' use of Braille? Because, and I think it's just the opposite. I think our access to Braille is so much greater because of being able to download books, from, well, in this country, NLS Bard and Bookshare. It's just, I have so many books that on my note taker, and I still remember when I was young and the summer arrived and I would take like loads of books from the library. And once I was done reading those, that was it. Like I had to wait till I was back in school. And certainly that does not ever happen anymore, at least not in this country.
Yeah.
So to me, that statistic
Yes.
does seem low, and I hope it is. And certainly the statistic that I'd like to pay attention to is the one that talks about employment and how people who are successfully employed are the ones who can use Braille well, who use Braille well. And certainly I think spelling is hugely improved if you're a Braille reader.
Yeah, there's a what if argument that seems to go off a lot, and it happens across every part of society these days. But almost it's as if I sometimes feel the argument is, well, if we say out loud that Braille equals literacy, but it also equals a route to employment, then we're kind of saying to people who don't have Braille skills, then you're not capable of that. Now, that's not the argument. That is not the argument.
Right.
No one should be making that argument.
Right.
What we're saying is that children, and why would you not want your child to have the best opportunities in life? In order to have that, this is a skill that will help that happen.
Yes.
Now, it's not going to guarantee anything. You still have to work hard. You still have to find a career that is going to require it, need it, nurture it, and all of that. But we cannot deny the fundamental value that it places on a child.
Yes.
And again, I go back to the pen and paper. It is reading and writing. We wouldn't send children out into the world without those skills. So why would we send a blind child out without those skills? And my argument goes further to say blind and low vision children out into the world without those skills.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree with you. Yeah. It's we shouldn't even be having this discussion. It's depressing that we are having this discussion. So, yeah, I just meant there shouldn't be the need to have this discussion. It should be a given.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And I wonder if the hope comes from technology. Because technology is advancing at a pace, with Braille in particular, and let's focus in on Braille. We're seeing devices like the Hable One, which is really popular among a lot of blind people. People who, by the way, have not I'm hearing so many stories from people who don't know Braille buying the Hable One anyway, so they can learn it.
Oh, wow.
And I find that really encouraging.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So you've got that. You've got Orbit, coming up with lower cost devices.
Yes.
You've got companies like HumanWare with the Mantis now, which enables people who don't maybe have the Perkins capabilities. You've got HIMS producing amazing products.
Yes.
You've got lots and lots of companies coming up with great ideas, embedding technology embedding Braille into technology, I should say. And that, I think, gives me some hope that perhaps this is a bit of a tanker that's going to take some time to turn. But I hope that all of this work will see those numbers of people increasing using Braille. But of course, it starts at school. And I go back to my point about we need to teach the children the reading capability, the writing capability of Braille. We have to teach that. So I guess the question is, how do we get there? But before we get to that question, because that's the biggest question, but technology, do you think there's hope through technology?
I certainly, I do. And I mean, yes, I do. And again, in terms of being able to download books, that's huge. Students who can email we spend a lot of time with students emailing their homework and learning how to do that, connecting I have to get better at connecting note takers to laptops or whatever, so that students can access things like Google Classroom or, but I think having a Braille display either on a note taker, if you're using it as a standalone, or connected to a laptop or your phone, if you can just use one everywhere, that will certainly increase your use of Braille. And yeah, there are just so many different avenues where it can be used that I think one of the hard things about teaching is if a teacher hasn't had a Braille student in a while and then suddenly gets one, just feeling like they know Braille well enough to be able to teach it, and not just to teach it, but to be really enthusiastic about the student using it. So, because so much of Braille is not just knowing it, but being able to promote its use. And I think technology is huge. One of the things, and I don't know why I didn't think of this a lot sooner, but I was with a student a number of weeks ago, and the student was typing on a laptop and said, "Oh, I don't know how to spell the word could. I know the contraction." And I said, "Well, let's write the contraction on your note taker and then change the grade of Braille to grade 1, which you can do super easily on this note taker." And she did that, and all of a sudden there was COULD. And I said, "So that can be one of your strategies to help with spelling."
Well, and that came up recently in one of our conversations. We were saying, how much do we, how plausible is that argument about literacy in Braille when a lot of people who are typing in Braille, especially in grade 2, are not actually spelling the words out? So
Yes.
do they really know the spelling of words in the way that perhaps if you were only using grade 1, you would? But
Yes. Well, that's one argument
that's
for the Mantis, I guess, right? Because
yeah.
you'd be writing on a QWERTY keyboard, and then it would come out in contracted Braille if you knew contracted Braille. So it's another way of reinforcing contractions as you're learning them. So yeah,
But that's part of education, isn't it? It's all part of the
Yes,
education
yeah.
of children, which we all learn to spell at school,
Yes.
And however we write these days, we will, I mean, so many people, of course, these days rely on autocorrect for everything and all of this. And it's interesting because one of the first things for me, the first thing that happened to me when I got the Mantis was I was able to send emails and check them properly, check them. And I had this kind of, almost emotional moment. I'm sitting there almost wiping tears away from my eyes when I'm listening to an email and I'm thinking to myself, well, it sounds fine, but is it fine? And then I check it with the Braille display and I realize the mistakes that are there and I can correct them. And that was, that simple thing
Yes.
just blew me away.
Yes.
Because I was like, wow, I can do this. Now I can send a professional email to someone with confidence that it is spelled correctly, the grammar's in the right place. I know it looks and it appears right. And that stuff matters. And I've got to say, on a personal level, Kate, it really did. It increased my confidence. Just that alone increased my confidence in the professional field because I didn't then worry. I didn't then play the game of, oh, it'll do.
Yes.
And and I'll just put a thing at the end that says, oh, expect typos because I'm dictating or I'm only listening to this.
Yes.
I'm not saying that people who do that shouldn't do that. I think we all have enough problems in our lives. We don't need to create new problems.
Of course, yeah.
But, if you have got the skill, if you are using it for that, then you should be proud of that. And I am.
Yes. Oh, that's a great story. I remember when I first started using the Braille Note Apex, I was convinced I would not like it because I couldn't read very quickly with it initially. And this all happened in one night. This is a Friday night. I still remember it. And I had the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and I had been talking with a friend about that book, and she had a question about something in it. And so I thought, oh my word, I can just do the find command. And I had it as a BRF file. It was in 3 volumes, but within a very short time, I'd figured out which volume it would be in. And, with Bookshare, you don't have that issue, but because it's all in one book. But within a few minutes, I found the answer to my friend's question, and I thought, this is it. I love this thing. And I just realized it had so much more to offer than I was immediately noticing. And I realized that with a little work, I could, become as fast a Braille reader as I wanted to be. So just by learning how to operate the thumb keys efficiently. And anyway, and that brings up a whole other discussion, because I absolutely love having a standalone note taker with a Braille display, but they're obviously expensive. But I can't quite bring myself to just having only a display and a laptop and my phone. It's like I love just having tons of folders that are organized. We have organized files in them and finding things quickly. And so that's another area of discussion, of course, as to what the best display or note taker is for someone. And that's a huge, huge area, which I certainly haven't sorted out for myself.
No, and there's a debate raging as well, of course, just in the last year between, whether or not Google's Android is the right way to go, or is it Windows inside these note takers. Obviously some of them don't use either, but
yes.
You will find that they do actually, some of these do have Android into them.
Yes.
And there have been arguments made to us here on our show that it's perhaps appropriate because, children are learning to use computers at school. They're learning to use PCs mostly because that's what's in the majority of the workplaces they're going to be going into.
Yeah.
Maybe in creative industries they'll use a Mac, but more likely or not they'll be using a PC.
Yes. So
teaching a child to use an Android device might seem a bit counterintuitive. Would it not be better to teach them what they're actually going to use? I mean, it's almost like, okay, we're almost getting to the point of saying, let's just load these children's brains up with so much information. But we have to decide what the right information is, so we give them the best chance. Don't overload them, but give them to me, it's a PC, it's learning Braille, it's learning to use a screen reader, because ultimately they all come together, right? I mean, you wouldn't use, even if you had a Braille display, you wouldn't use a computer without JAWS or NVDA or Narrator.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I know, we need it all. And it's a lot to learn. It's definitely a lot to learn.
Cognitive load for me is something which I do seem to struggle with a little bit these days, more so than I did when I was younger. A Braille display can ease that in some ways, because you can finally turn the speech off.
Yes.
And you can just read with your fingers. And that was kind of one of the things for me for learning Braille, was I could finally read in silence.
Yes.
We don't get much of that, do we?
No, that's a very good point. And then the other thing that we haven't talked a lot about is the use of Braille beyond academics. Like, I'm a lector at our church, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to read at church. I've been doing it for well over 20 years, and I could not do that without Braille. So in addition to all that we've talked about so far, there are so many other uses for Braille outside of school that enhance our life. I've knitting patterns in Braille, and if I have a complicated one, I don't want to bring the whole pattern. I can just write down a few of the rows that I know I'm going to need to do, and there they are. I can just grab it and read. Or being able to deliver a speech and having notes on your note taker, or even just a note card with whatever topics you might want to cover and don't want to digress and forget about. There are so many aspects of Braille beyond using, beyond all that we've talked about, that so many things we couldn't do without Braille. I guess that's my point.
I mean, I recently bought a Braille calendar.
Oh, yes.
Which I just love.
I agree.
It's so useful.
It's funny that you should say that, because I was using one in several of my classes yesterday. I have the, here it's the American Printing House, the APH calendar, and it's the coolest thing because it has like symbols for when there's going to be a full moon, or or, when daylight saving time begins, which I'm, that kind of thing. And holidays, and I love showing that to students. And one of my students wanted one, so we bought one for that student. But I agree with you. I love having a Braille calendar.
I mean, it's just it makes everything so much simpler, doesn't it? Just it just that simple thing of I'm always looking at dates. So hang on, when is that date relevant to this? And and yes, I can use my computer. Yes, I can go into my calendar app, but it takes time. It takes quite a bit of time and quite a bit of that cognitive load I'm talking about.
Yes.
Whereas I can just feel, oh, hang on, that's the date. Got it. And and it's funny you say that about the days mentioned, because I noticed mine's is written in grade 2. So it's kind of teaching me grade 2 by the back door a little bit. And I actually can read it. That's the weird thing. I'm actually like, oh, that must be grade 2 because that word is missing something.
Yes.
That must be what that symbol, that's AR. Okay, got it, right.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing, you just pick up. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yep. Yes. That's very cool. I know, I can't believe.
And I'll say one more.
Yes, sure.
I'll just say one more tip that I use it for, because again, it's that thing of you start just, and it's like this, isn't it? It's like a new toy. But my bank card details. Everyone's always asking you for your bank card details. And I can't remember that 16-digit number as much as I might like to try. And, I can write it down on a Braille index card and I can keep it in my wallet and I can just keep it there. So I know if anyone asks, I can just pull it out and go, it's this.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, it just, it fosters that independence, doesn't it?
Yes.
It just gives us the independence to live our lives without saying, hey, can you help?
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Yep. Or using an ATM machine. So you know where to insert the card or whatever. You can, but that's a great example.
We're way beyond the question, Kate, aren't we? That Braille, because this comes up all the time. Is Braille dead? Is Braille dying? We're way beyond that, aren't we?
I hope so. I certainly hope so. It's a worry for me, but I certainly hope that Braille is here forever, and having things like World Braille Day and these discussions certainly helps, I think, to keep that discussion as an ongoing thing.
What's the worry for you? What kills Braille for you? Is it the technology? Is it lack of interest? Is it lack of resources? What is it?
I worry about audio, and again, I would never say there's no place for audio, but when kids who are reading, and I'm sure this comes up in print as well, when kids are reading and listening to a fantastic reader read an audiobook versus developing your reading speed so that you can read quickly. That's one thing I worry about, that people are going to rely on audio to the point where they don't learn to read quickly. And then that use of functional Braille for other purposes, like, me being a lector at church, it makes it that less possible. Although, for some of my students who are not fast Braille, they don't read Braille quickly or fluidly for a variety of reasons. Often what we will do, if they know they have something coming up that they will have to read, we put it on their note taker so that they can practice it, so they can use speech as a backup for a word that they might not recognize, and they can just, turn speech on for a quick second and put the cursor on that word and then have the speech identify it. So, practicing what you need to read, if it's a limited, if it's a short thing, will certainly help with that if you're not a fast Braille reader. But I do worry that audio will mean that there are fewer readers who are faster, who develop a fast reading speed. I'm not saying it very well, but yeah.
No, I get what you mean, because it's almost it can be the case that audio can feel quicker.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's a little bit of a fool's errand, actually, because you can miss it. And I learned this as I mentioned, with the emails and the Mantis.
Yes.
I'm able to read that email back and I'm hearing it and it sounds fine. It sounds right.
Yes.
But I've spelled names wrong, or a word has actually been misspelled. I remember World Ook Day, I completely missed the B in book. And I didn't realize it until I went to the Braille, and I'm like, oh, did that say ook? It should have said ook. And then I'm like, but of course it said it so quickly that I just heard it as World Book Day. So I just
Yes,
assumed it was fine. Your brain will fill in the gaps. So
absolutely.
this is where being able to check that and
Mhm.
actually be able to get it corrected is really important.
Yes. Yeah.
Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. Do you think Braille can have any impact there? Do you think Braille will have any role to play in an AI world?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It's a fascinating, I don't know. Um, that whole AI thing is just, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm not. I'm with you. I don't know, and I wonder though if perhaps it's the other way around, where AI, because of the way that it allows people to get access to information, and the way that we would start using when we started using computers, and it was the Google search, and it would come up with results, and we would go through those results.
Yes.
Now it's pretty much just ditching all that and going straight to the answer.
Hmm.
And I wonder if again that just takes us away from the need to interact with a computer in the way we've been used to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Although I say that, and I'm minded of the fact that, of all the advances that have been made in computing, the humble QWERTY keyboard still remains.
Hmm.
So I think there's hope.
Yes.
There's no one. I know there's some companies, and every company's talking about replacing the keyboard and the mouse and the. I don't see it happening
Yeah.
anytime soon. I think
Yeah.
too many people are used to using them. So I think for that reason, the modern way of doing things or the current way of doing things will continue.
Hmm.
But I think it's more about the impact of information and gathering information
Hmm.
and reading.
Hmm.
We may all just become a little bit lazier as a result of AI.
Yeah.
And I think that seems to be the point of AI.
Yes. Yeah. I think you're right. I have, and this is totally off the topic, but I have used the National Braille Press in Boston for years and years and years, just as I use the Xavier Society in New York for reading Braille materials that are related to the Catholic Church and but I think things like Braille jewelry, like the National Braille Press sells. I have two necklaces that one of my sons gave me, and one of them says strong on it, and the other is mom. And then I have a pin that one of my students gave me, that two of my students gave me many years ago, that says read for fun. I have another pin that is in the shape of a candle, and it says Noel. Um, it's a Christmas thing, obviously, that a friend with whom I used to teach gave to me many years ago. And I think those kinds of little things also help to promote Braille and to bring, attention from people who have vision, so that it's just another way of making the quote unquote outside world more aware of Braille. So I just wanted to throw that out. It's totally off the topic of what we were speaking of, but
I don't think it is. I actually don't think it is, because I think that we were talking about AI, and I think that one of the downsides of AI, and I think for me anyway, and I think about this maybe in a different way, perhaps less personal, but I remember when we started switching media to digital, that it kind of felt that we were moving away from a physical world to a virtual world, and I felt that we lost something in that. And in my case, it was music. I remember having access to every single song I could ever think of, but feeling completely bereft of music.
yes,
Because I had no idea what I had. Whereas when I had a CD collection, I had something physical I could hold and I could
it's
love,
true.
and I could
Yes,
remember go to the CD player and put it on and love it.
yes,
And you don't get that in the virtual world.
it's
And I feel
true.
that's perhaps the same with what you're talking about. Those things you have, those necklaces, that jewelry will remain forever.
Yes, yes.
And AI can never replace that.
It's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Yep. The other thing I love are Braille drawings. And I always have some on the door of my classroom. And I now when I give cards to people, I will often just like write a little Braille heart on the envelope with their name in Braille, even though I'm giving most things to people who have vision, who are sighted. And that's another promo for the Perkins Braille Writer, because I wouldn't be able to do those without that. So, um, yeah, and it's also a great way, like when I've been assessing Braille students, one of the things I often do is to show them a drawing, just see how much of it they can check out and figure out if they can even figure out what it is, or if they can find letters or contractions or whatever. So it's another great way to promote Braille, as well as, it's like using it as an assessment tool in a roundabout way.
Kate, it has been absolutely glorious to spend this hour with you. First off, and I should have said this at the beginning, but thank you so much for coming into work so early this morning to do this interview.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really, I could talk about Braille endlessly. So it's something I've always felt very, very passionate about. I used to, when my kids were little, I started reading about Braille literacy and the fear that it was, going away, and that it was definitely in need of attention. And so even when my children were little and I wasn't formally teaching, I ended up volunteering and had one student and then eventually a few more. So it's something that I've just been, just feel so strongly about. So it's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk about it.
Okay, thanks so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate that. Thanks for coming on to Double Tap.
Oh, you're most welcome. And thank you for having your podcast.
And a huge thanks to Kate Crohan for joining us today. We continue our conversation on education tomorrow. We're going to be joined by Elizabeth McCann, who's taught in the UK and in Canada and elsewhere in the world. She talks about that worldview tomorrow on Double Tap as we continue to celebrate Braille at 200.